Hi everyone, today I'm going to be talking about 10 things you might not know about Jake Burton. So if you don't snowboard or you don't know who Jake Burton is, he is the founder of Burton Snowboards. He was one of the pioneers of snowboarding, and he was very influential in getting these snowboards onto resorts at a time when they weren't allowed. So whether or not you like Burton as a brand or you dislike Burton as a brand, it doesn't matter. If you're sliding down a hill sideways, Jake had a major part in that. So we owe a lot to him. But anyways, let's talk about the 10 things that you might not know about Jake. All right, so let's start with number 10. So Jake Burton was able to start Burton Boards with money that he inherited from his grandmother. So a lot of people would say, hey, Jake was super lucky. He had a lot of money to start this company. But I wouldn't say that Jake was lucky. When he was 13 years old, he lost his brother in the Vietnam War. At 17 years old, being super young, he lost his mother. So the money that he inherited was from his grandmother when she passed away. So Jake and his sisters ended up getting money because his mother had passed away, so the money went to them. So I wouldn't say that Jake was lucky. Even with that money, he still struggled to make it, and he never gave up. So he had a vision. He loved the snurfer. He loved surfing. And he never gave up. Even people with money, if they don't have a passion for this, if they would have gone through some of the struggles that Jake did, a lot of them would have given up. So Jake had a passion, he had a vision, and he went for it. Number 9. So when Jake moved from New York to Londonderry, Vermont, he had some relatives that lived in the area, and they were able to help him find a place to stay in South Londonderry, Vermont. So Jake lived in a farmhouse where he helped take care of some horses and the farmhouse. And in exchange for that, he was able to live rent-free in one of the farmhouses. So in one of the barns in the farm, he was able to work on some of the prototypes. Number 8. So when Jake moved into his first shop in Londonderry, Vermont, he had 3 employees. 2 of them were relatives. I believe they were his cousins. Don't quote me on that. But it was Mimi Wright and Mark Wright. And they had a friend, Mike, who was also working at the shop. So Jake had a contest between his 3 employees to see who could design the best logo for his company. So it turns out that only one person decided to submit something. So Mimi Wright was the winner of the contest, and she won $100. So you guys won't believe this, but she was the one that designed the famous Burton Mountain logo that you see all over the place. So her design was a little bit different from the one that you see now, but it looked just like this. So I think you can see it on this board. This is exactly the one that she designed. So the famous mountain logo that you see there, but at that time in 1979, it used to have these really thin lines on both sides. But yeah, when you see that Burton logo, just know that that was designed by Mimi Wright. Very cool. Number 7. So the first year that Jake made snowboards, he struggled to sell them. So he was in need of money, and there's a story out there that he once rented a van, filled it with wood that he had gotten in Vermont to sell in Long Island, New York. So his plan was to take all this wood and to sell it to some of the residents in New York to make some extra money on the side, since he wasn't making enough money selling snowboards. So the story goes that he drove all the way out there, and it turned out to be a nightmare. So he ended up with 2 flat tires and ended up having to ditch all the wood that he had taken over there. So Jake struggled. He was very creative. He found ways to make money, and sometimes it didn't work out. So Jake wasn't afraid to tell you that he struggled a lot. Even till his last days, he was very emotional about what he went through when he was starting Burton Boards. So he was very lonely at times. He had to let go of relatives when he wasn't making money. And he had to always take in what people were saying about him, that they didn't believe in him, and he thought everything he was doing was a joke. Even him being successful, he was still emotional about that. So Jake struggled a lot, but he was always creative and always trying to find ways to make it. Number 6. So when Jake started Burton Boards, his intention wasn't to make a snowboard for ski resorts. His only intention was just to make a snowboard that you could take out with your friends on a hill, on a golf course, something that you could have fun with on a snowy day and just enjoy the day. It was a cheap alternative to skiing, which was very expensive at the time. So eventually his company grew and his way of thinking changed. Number 5. So the first board that Jake made for the public was called the Burton BB1. So it looked exactly like this board that's on the table here. So this is a replica of the board, the BB1, but it looked very similar to this. There's slight differences in this replica, but it's very similar. The size, the shape. The BB1 was called the Burton Board 1. That's what BB1 stood for. The BB1 was also called the Burton Backhill. So the Backhill was the board that brought that front binding here, and it brought like the back strap here. So there were 3 problems with this board. Jake had a lot of problems selling these boards. The first problem is that people were just saying they were too expensive. The second problem was that right here where this board says Londonderry, Vermont, USA, the first boards used to say Stratton Mountain, USA. And so Jake was threatened to get sued because he put that on the board without permission. So that was the second problem. The third problem was that people were complaining that since he painted the bases on the board, the bottom section, so people were saying that when they would ride them, that the paint would peel off. So those boards had those three problems. So Jake was smart. What he did is the following year, he stopped painting the boards. He just left them a natural wood grain finish, and then he still put the Burton logo on here at the front, and he put Burton boards here. But instead of putting Stratton Mountain on it, now he would put Londonderry, Vermont, just like you see it in this board right here. So they were wood grain, they said Londonderry, Vermont. And then he solved the cost problem by making a second board that was called the Burton BB2. And that was the Burton backyard. So it was the cheaper version of the backhill because it didn't bring the front binding and it didn't bring a strap in the back. So Jake sold two boards. He sold the Burton BB1, the more expensive version, and the BB2, the less expensive version. So the following year, Jake did something really, really cool. So he wanted the BB1 to look different. And so he had leftover paint from the first boards that he made. And so he ended up painting, instead of leaving them like a wood grain finish, what he did is he ended up painting the boards blue from the top and from the side. But since people were complaining that the paint would peel off on the bottom, if you look at a Burton BB1 that's blue, the later version of it, it's just, he left it wood grain. He didn't have this lettering here. Number 4. So in 1979, Jake Burton ended up winning the National Snurfing Contest in Muskegon, Michigan. So that contest was only supposed to be for snurfers, but Jake ended up showing up with a Burton BB1 and a BB2. He wanted to show those off and he wanted to win the snurfing contest to show what his boards could do. But it turned out that when he showed up, the people that were running the contest, the Muskegon Community College, they were all confused. They had no idea that other boards existed. And the other problem was that the contest was being sponsored by the company that made the snurfer. So they were kind of like worried about that. What they ended up doing is, since they didn't make any rules against other boards, since they weren't expecting them, they ended up making an open division, and Jake ended up winning that. So he ended up winning like $200 or $300 and he took home a trophy. Number 3. So in 1982, Jake's wife, Donna Carpenter, ended up giving Jake a golden retriever that he named Ruffian. So Jake named that dog after a really famous racehorse that ended up getting injured in Belmont. So at that time, Jake was working at Belmont. They tried to surgically repair the horse's leg, and the horse kept fighting the surgeons and the vets and kept re-injuring itself. So they ended up putting the horse down, and Jake was devastated when that happened. So in the 70s when that happened, Jake never forgot about that. So in 82, when Donna gave him the golden retriever, he named that dog Ruffian. And so Jake, the reason I'm bringing this one up is because Jake was an animal lover. He cared about animals, and people that care about animals, they have a good heart. So Jake, you know, as most of you know, he let his employees bring their dogs to work, and he was a huge animal lover and he had a big heart. Number 2. So number 2 might be the most obvious to all of you, and you might be saying, come on, that's number 2, but it'll lead us to number 1. But in case you don't know, Jake Burton's last name is not Burton. That's his middle name. So it's Jake Burton Carpenter. But that leads us to number 1. Jake's first name is not Jake. His first name is John, his middle name is Burton, and his last name is Carpenter. So on his birth certificate is John Burton Carpenter. Jake was a name that his older sister, Catherine, gave him just as a nickname, and that nickname stayed. So there you have it, guys. 10 things that you might not have known about Jake Burton Carpenter. So if you at least picked up one, I'm happy. I did my job. But I hope that you learned more than one. And for those people that don't know a lot about Jake, he was a special guy. And when he passed away, it was a huge, huge loss to snowboarding. Even right now, it kind of just hurts me to think that he's gone. But he did so much for snowboarding, and everybody that rides, we owe a lot to him. And man, he was a special guy. So rest in peace, Jake, and we miss you, and thank you for everything that you did for us. Thanks.